"You seriously cut me out of the will?" I asked, staring down my dad, his cold smirk hitting me like a slap in the face. "Lucas, you were never really part of this," he shot back, like it was the most obvious thing ever. My family had straight up stolen everything I'd busted my ass for, but what they didn't know was I already had their fate in my hands. It all went down at a family dinner at our old house in the Chicago suburbs. I rolled up expecting the usual: roast turkey, fake smiles, and small talk that meant nothing. But something felt off. My dad, Richard, had this smug grin plastered on his face. My stepmom, Elizabeth, couldn't stop giggling like she was in on some big secret, and my half-sister Sophia was glowing like she'd just won the lottery. Me? I'm Lucas, 27, grinding my life away at the family winery, my grandpa's baby out in California, and I felt like a total outsider at their little party. I'd poured everything into that winery: time, money, my damn soul. When Dad bitched about debts, I took out loans to keep us afloat. When we needed new clients, I was flying cross-country, closing deals left and right. I thought it was our thing, our legacy. But that night, when Dad raised his glass and announced he'd rewritten the will, it felt like the ground disappeared under me. "The winery stays in the family," he said, staring straight at Sophia. "And I know who's gonna take care of it best. Me? Didn't even get a mention." After dinner, I stuck around to talk to Dad one-on-one. "Dad, what the hell's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my shit together. He looked at me like I was some annoying mosquito. "Lucas, thou hast always been too independent. Sophia's the future of this business. She knows how to keep our name alive." I was floored. Independent? Me, the guy who'd given up everything for the family. Elizabeth, eavesdropping at the door, chimed in. "What? You thought you'd just get it all handed to you on a silver platter? This ain't your win." That's when it hit me. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment move. They'd been planning this for months, maybe years. Sophia, who barely showed up at the office, was their golden child. And me? I was just a tool they used until I wasn't useful anymore. They took my money, my ideas, my work, and tossed me out like trash. But as I walked out of that house that night, I made a vow. They were gonna pay, and I knew exactly how to make it happen. I didn't sleep that night, their words looping in my head like a bad song. But instead of drowning in anger, I started digging. I had access to the winery's files. I'd been keeping the books for years. At 3 a.m, I struck gold, an old contract signed by Grandpa. It flat out said shares only go to people actively working in the business. Guess who that was? Not Sophia. She didn't even know the names of our suppliers. But that was just the start. I remembered the winery had landed a fat state grant for eco-projects, one I'd written the application for. My name was still on it as the project lead. If I culled out, the grant would vanish, and the winery would go under with all its debts. I grinned for the first time that day. They thought they could erase me? I was about to show them what real betrayal looks like. The next day, I called up Grandpa's old buddy, our family lawyer, who knew every nook and cranny of the business. "Lucas, this is big," he said after checking out the contract. "Thou can fight the will, and not only that, thou couldst freeze any winery deals until this gets sorted." I told him to start prepping papers for a lawsuit against Dad and Elizabeth. But I wasn't just aiming to win in court. I wanted them to feel the same humiliation I did. I also called the state office that gave us the grant. I gotta step back from the project, I said, faking a heavy heart. Family stuff. The guy on the phone was shook. Without you, the project's dead. You sure about this? Oh, I was sure. Hanging up, I pictured Dad's face when he found out his precious winery was losing millions. But I didn't stop there. I found out Sophia was throwing a big-ass party at the winery to celebrate her inheritance. She'd invited local bloggers and the press, champagne and all. I hit up one of those bloggers, Jake, and spilled the tea. How my family screwed me over, used my money, and kicked me to the curb. Jake was hyped. "This is gonna blow up online," he said. I told him to hold off and drop it live at her party for maximum chaos. I also dug up old texts where Sophia bragged to her friends about getting me out of the way to take it all. I anonymously sent those to a local outlet that eats up scandals. Everything was ready. I waited for her party, knowing it was gonna be their downfall. The party kicked off like a dream. Sophia was posing in a killer dress, cameras flashing, Dad and Elizabeth grinning at the guests like they owned the world. I was there, lurking in the shadows, watching. Then Jake went live and flipped the script. "Yo, I got some serious dirt," he said, flashing screenshots of Sophia's texts and my story about getting cut from the will. Guests started whispering. Cameras swung to Sophia, whose face went white as a ghost. Right then, the state dropped the hammer. The grant was officially canceled. Dad got the letter in the middle of the party, and his face turned gray when he realized the winery was days from going bust. Elizabeth tried to save face, yelling at Jake, but that just made it worse. Social media went nuts. Hashtag Family Betrayal was trending on Twitter. The next morning, Dad called me, voice shaking with rage. "Lucas, what the hell did you do? You've ruined everything." I kept my cool. "You started this, Dad. You stole my future, so I took yours." He tried threatening, then begging, but I wasn't having it. Sophia sent me a long, teary text full of apologies and excuses. But I knew it was all an act. She wasn't sorry, just sorry she got caught. Elizabeth showed up at my place next, trying to play the family card. "Lucas, we're family. We can fix this." I laughed in her face. "Family? You stopped being that the second you decided I was worthless." I slammed the door, feeling a weight lift off my chest. But then shit got wild. A week after the party, I got a letter from Grandpa's old friend who used to help run the winery back in the 80s. He spilled that Grandpa had set up a secret trust nobody knew about, not even Dad. In that trust, 40% of the winery's shares were locked for me, and nobody could touch them. Dad and Elizabeth didn't even know it existed. I met with our lawyer, and he confirmed the trust was legit, and I could claim my shares right then. Plus, with my lawsuit, the winery was under my control until the court sorted it out. I was the one calling the shots now. I could have torched the winery, but I saw a better move. I got the grant reinstated under my name and started restructuring the business. Sophia and Elizabeth tried to worm their way back in, but I hired new lawyers to shut them down. Dad, he just faded into the background, knowing he'd lost. The most mind-blowing moment came when I found a letter from Grandpa in his old papers. He wrote that he always saw me as the real heir, but he wanted me to prove it. "If you're reading this, Lucas," he said, "you fought and you've won." I got choked up. Grandpa believed in me, even when my own family turned their backs. The winery started killing it under my lead. I launched a new wine line named after Grandpa, and it was a total hit. Social media flipped from dragging our scandal to hyping my comeback. I became the local legend, the guy who beat Betrayal and came out on top. Sophia tried crawling back, saying she'd changed. I saw through her. Elizabeth skipped town, too ashamed to stick around. Dad sent me an apology letter. I didn't bother replying. I didn't need their approval anymore. Now I'm sitting in my office, looking out at the vineyards that used to be my home. I didn't just take back my share, I took it all. And that feeling of freedom, control, and straight-up winning, it was worth every fight. My family thought they could erase me, but I showed them I'm a damn force to be reckoned with. I figured that was the end of the story with the winery. I got my share back, reinstated the grant, and started a new chapter. But turns out, that was just Act 1. A month after I took over, I got a call from some random number. The guy on the line introduced himself as Matthew Crow, a lawyer from New York. "Lucas, I've got info about your grandpa that might interest you," he said, all cryptic. "It's not just about the winery. It's way bigger." My heart started pounding. What else could Grandpa have hidden? I set up a meeting, but my head was spinning with questions. Matthew wouldn't spill over the phone, just hinted it was about another asset nobody in the family knew about. I started wondering if Dad and Elizabeth were hiding something even from Sophia. Maybe it was their backup plan if their scheme fell apart? I couldn't wait. I started digging through Grandpa's old records stored in the winery's basement. Down there, among dusty boxes and old barrels, I found a metal safe I'd never seen before. No keys, but the lid had an engraving. "For Lucas, when the time comes." Chills ran down my spine. Grandpa clearly left this for me. But why had nobody ever mentioned this safe? I called a locksmith, and an hour later, we cracked it open. Inside were documents, letters, and a map. Yeah, a legit map, like something out of an adventure flick, marked up with notes about a piece of land in Oregon. The papers laid out a bombshell. Grandpa didn't just own the winery. He'd bought a huge chunk of land in the 70s. It was an abandoned farm he planned to turn into an eco-resort. Here's the kicker. That land was worth millions now because it was right by a national park. And it was all in my name through that same secret trust the lawyer mentioned. Dad and Elizabeth didn't have a clue. I met Matthew at his New York office. He showed me Grandpa's will, which confirmed the Oregon land was mine. But there was a catch. To claim it, I had to physically check out the property and sign papers on site. "Could be trouble," Matthew warned. "Your dad's been asking around about your grandpa's old assets. Seems like he's onto something." I clenched my jaw. Of course Dad wouldn't let it go. He was still trying to steal what was rightfully mine. The papers laid out a bombshell. Grandpa didn't just own the winery, he'd bought a huge chunk of land in the 70s. It was an abandoned farm he planned to turn into an eco-resort. Here's the kicker. That land was worth millions now because it was right by a national park. And it was all in my name through that same secret trust the lawyer mentioned. Dad and Elizabeth didn't have a clue. I met Matthew at his New York office. He showed me Grandpa's will, which confirmed the Oregon land was mine. But there was a catch. To claim it, I had to physically check out the property and sign papers on site. Could be trouble, Matthew warned. Your dad's been asking around about your grandpa's old assets. Seems like he's on to something. I clenched my jaw. Of course Dad wouldn't let it go. He was still trying to steal what was rightfully mine. This is mine, I said, holding up the papers. Grandpa left it to me. Dad let out a nervous laugh. You think we're gonna let you take everything? We'll fight this. I expected that, but it still pissed me off. They hadn't changed one bit. Even after everything, they still saw me as a threat, not family. But then shit got wilder. Jake, who was filming the whole thing for his stream, noticed Dad clutching a folder. What's that, Richard? He asked, all sarcastic. Dad tried to hide it, but Jake was quicker. He snatched it and opened it up. Inside were forged. Are you kidding me? I shouted. You tried to forge Grandpa's will? Dad started stammering, trying to talk his way out, but Sophia lost it. It was Elizabeth's idea, she blurted, pointing at Dad. She said we had to take the land before you found out. Dad went pale as his own daughter threw him under the bus. Jake, never missing a beat, uploaded the video, and it went viral in hours. The scandal was massive. Local news picked it up, and Dad and Sophia became a laughingstock. I filed another lawsuit, this time for fraud. Matthew was stoked. This is the end of their reputation, Lucas. They can't touch your rights. But I wasn't just aiming to win in court. I wanted them to feel what it's like to lose everything, like they tried to do to me. I headed back to Chicago and started planning the Oregon land. I hired an architect to design an eco-resort that would bring Grandpa's dream to life. But I also decided to use my story to inspire others. I reached out to producers of a podcast about family drama and told them my story. They were all over it, and soon I was a guest on their show, spilling everything from the family's betrayal to finding the secret trust. But the story wasn't over. A few months into building the resort, I got a letter from Elizabeth. She begged for a meeting, saying she wanted to make things right. I agreed, but not because I bought her act. I wanted to look her in the eye and figure out her game. When we met at a cafe, she looked broken. Lucas, I screwed up, she said, her voice shaky. I pushed Richard to cut you out. I thought it would protect Sophia. I stared at her, feeling zero sympathy. You destroyed the family, Elizabeth, not me. She tried to argue, but I cut her off. You made your choice. Live with it. I walked out, leaving her there. Later, I heard she'd left the country, unable to handle the public shame. Sophia tried to come back too. She sent a long letter full of apologies, but I could see through her. She hadn't changed. She just wanted back in. I didn't reply. Instead, I focused on the resort. The first phase of construction was done, and I threw an opening ceremony, inviting bloggers, locals, and even a few celebs. Jake streamed it live, and the response was unreal. The most emotional moment came when I found a letter from Grandpa in his old stuff. He wrote, "Lucas, if you're reading this, you found your place. Don't let anyone take your strength." I got teary-eyed. Grandpa knew I'd make it. He believed in me, even when my family turned their backs. Now I'm standing at the resort's opening, looking out at the guests who came to celebrate. The winery's thriving, the Oregon land's turning into a gem. And me? I'm not the guy who begged his family to see his worth anymore. I'm Lucas, the dude who survived betrayal, fought, and won. My family thought they could erase me, but I proved I'm stronger. I didn't just take back my inheritance, I built something new. And you know what? This is just the start. I'm planning to expand the resort, write a book, and maybe even make a documentary about my story. But most importantly, I'll never let anyone stand in my way again. Thanks for sticking with me. Drop in the comments how you'd handle it if your family betrayed you like mine did. This is Lucas's story, and I'm just getting started. The opening of the eco-resort in Oregon was my big win, but I knew deep down my family wasn't going to give up that easy. Dag, Richard, and Sophia went quiet after the public scandal, but Elizabeth, who'd bolted out of the country, left too many loose ends. I had a gut feeling she was up to something, and I was right. A couple weeks after the resort opened, Jake, my blogger buddy, hit me up. "Lucas, you seen the latest social media posts?" he asked, sounding freaked out. I opened Twitter and froze. The hashtag #LucasTheFraud was trending out of nowhere. Someone had anonymously leaked claims that I'd forged Grandpa's documents to snag the winery and the Oregon land. The posts were vicious. Lucas stole the family legacy. He's a fraud who ruined his family. I knew exactly who was behind it. I called Matthew, my lawyer, and asked him to track down who started this smear campaign. He dug in and found the accounts spreading the rumors were new and tied to an IP address in Mexico. Elizabeth, I thought. She'd fled there after the scandal, and now she was playing dirty. But I wasn't about to sit back and take it. It was time to end this war for good. I kicked off my own investigation. First, I hired a private investigator to track Elizabeth's moves in Mexico. A few days later, he sent a report. Elizabeth had rented an office in Cancun and hired a PR team to launch a campaign against me. She'd even reached out to the winery's investors, trying to convince them I was incompetent and the business would tank under me. But that wasn't all. The PI found proof she'd bribed a local journalist to write a hit piece on me. I was pissed, but honestly kind of impressed by her nerve. She thought she could take me down from another country? I decided to hit back just as hard. I called Jake and pitched an idea. We'd make a documentary-style video laying out the whole truth about my family's betrayal, backed up with evidence. "This is gonna be a banger," Jake said, and we got to work. While we were prepping the video, I got a surprise letter from Sophia. She claimed she didn't know about Elizabeth's plans and wanted to help me fix things. I didn't buy a word of it, but I saw an opportunity. "All right, Sophia," I wrote back. "Let's meet in Chicago. Tell me everything you know." I knew she'd try to play me, but I had a plan. I set up a hidden camera in the cafe where we were meeting to catch every word. When Sophia showed up, she looked nervous as hell. "Lucas, I didn't want things to turn out like this," she started, but her eyes were darting around. She said Elizabeth had contacted her from Mexico and pitched teaming up to take back the winery. Sophia claimed she said no, but I noticed her fiddling with her bracelet, a tell she's lying. I played along, acting like I believed her, and asked her to pass a message to Elizabeth that I was open to talks. It was my move. Really, I was using Sophia to lure Elizabeth out. I knew she'd come back to the States if she thought I was ready to cave. A week later, she flew into Chicago, and I set up a meeting at the winery's office. But it was a trap. I invited Matthew, Jake, and a few journalists who already knew the truth about her schemes. When Elizabeth walked in, thinking I was on my knees, she was floored to see cameras. "Well, Elizabeth, tell us about forging documents and starting a smear campaign against me," I said, holding up printouts of her emails with the PR team. She went pale, but tried to spin it. "It's all lies. You set this up," she yelled. But Jake was already streaming live, and viewers watched her lose it. Social media blew up again, and hashtag Lucas the Fraud flipped to hashtag Elizabeth Exposed. After that meeting, Elizabeth's reputation was done for. Journalists ran stories based on the evidence I gave them, and the winery's investors cut all ties with her. But I didn't stop there. I filed another lawsuit, this time for defamation and fraud. Matthew was confident we'd win and suggested I push for a settlement to cover my resort expenses. But then came another twist. While prepping for the lawsuit, I got a call from an old friend of Grandpa's who used to work at the winery. His name was Frank, and he dropped a bombshell. Grandpa didn't just leave the Oregon land, he'd also stashed a few $1,000,000 in a Swiss bank account. "He wanted you to use it for something big," Frank said. I was stunned. Grandpa was still surprising me from beyond the grave. I flew to Zurich to verify the account. The bank confirmed it was real, and the money was mine. But there was a catch. Grandpa's condition was that I invest part of it in charity. I smiled. That was so him, still teaching me to be better even in his will. I decided to start a foundation in his name to support young entrepreneurs facing betrayal or tough times, just like I did. Back in the States, I got to work on the foundation. I called it Wilson Legacy after Grandpa. The first thing I did was fund a grant for a local school in Oregon to build a new science center. It was my way of saying thanks to the community that backed me during the scandal. The lawsuit against Elizabeth wrapped up with a win. She had to pay me a hefty settlement, and her name became a joke in business circles. Sophia, realizing she was out of moves, tried one last time to make up. She sent a long video, crying and begging for forgiveness. "Lucas, I was stupid. I want to start over," she said. But I knew it was just another attempt to weasel back in. I replied short and sweet, "You made your choice. Good luck." Dad was the last to reach out. He showed up at my winery office, looking older than ever. "Lucas, I was a shitty dad," he said, head down. "I let Elizabeth manipulate me." For the first time, he seemed genuine, but it was way too late. "You're right, Dad," I said, "but I don't need your approval anymore." He left, and I figured that was the last we'd say to each other. Life's different now. The eco-resort's a major draw in Oregon, pulling in tourists from all over. The winery's killing it, and I launched a new wine line under the Wilson Legacy brand. My foundation's helping dozens of young folks, and my book about betrayal and triumph is already getting publisher buzz. The documentary I made with Jake even won an award at a film festival. But the biggest twist came from a letter I got from a woman named Clara, who said she was my aunt, Grandpa's sister I'd never heard of. She lived in Canada and told me Grandpa kept in touch with her on the down low because of an old fight with Dad. Clara came to Oregon and we clicked instantly. She was kind, wise, and full of stories about Grandpa that helped me understand him even better. Now I'm standing on my resort's terrace, looking at the sunset over the mountains. Clara's next to me, sipping wine from our winery, and we're laughing, remembering Grandpa. I'm not that scared kid my family tried to break anymore. I'm Lucas, the guy who turned betrayal into triumph, pain into strength, and dreams into reality. My family thought they could erase me, but I built an empire on their ruins. And thou know what? That feeling of freedom, control, and victory, 'tis the best thing I've ever felt. I didn't just take back my inheritance. I created something way bigger than they could have ever imagined. Thanks for sticking with me to the end. This story went longer than I expected, but every twist was worth it. Drop in the comments how you'd handle being in my shoes and what you'd do with an inheritance like this. This is Lucas, and I'm just getting started. I thought the resort opening, the winery success, and starting the foundation in Grandpa's name finally closed that chapter of my life. But as it turns out, the past has a way of creeping back when you least expect it. It started with a letter I got a month after the resort opened, handwritten, which was weird in the age of emails. The signature read, Thomas Wilson. I froze. Wilson was Grandpa's last name, but I'd never heard of a Thomas. The letter said he was my distant relative, Grandpa's cousin, and he knew about the winery, the resort, and all my fights with the family. Lucas, we need to meet. I've got info that could change everything, he wrote. I was on guard. After everything with Dad, Elizabeth, and Sophia, I didn't trust anyone popping up out of nowhere with big claims. But curiosity got the better of me. I called Matthew, my lawyer, and asked him to check out this Thomas guy. A couple days later, he got back to me. Thomas Wilson's legit, lives in Montana, owns a small farm. Seems like he's really a relative, but he stayed away from the family after a falling out with your dad. It checked out, but I still smelled a rat. I agreed to meet Thomas on neutral ground, a cafe in Portland, close to my resort. When I walked in, I knew it was him right away. An older guy with gray hair and eyes that looked just like Grandpa's, sitting at a table with an old photo in his hands. Lucas, he said smiling, you're the spitting image of your grandpa when he was young. He showed me the photo. Grandpa looking young, standing next to another guy, Thomas, in front of vineyards. Thomas told me he and Grandpa were business partners years ago, but Dad, Richard, drove a wedge between them, accusing Thomas of trying to steal a piece of the winery. I walked away to avoid a war, he said, but your grandpa never forgot me. He left me a letter I only found recently. In it, he asked me to look out for you if things went south. I got a lump in my throat. Grandpa was still watching out for me, even years after he was gone. But that wasn't all. Thomas showed me documents he found with the letter. Turns out, Grandpa left another asset, a warehouse in California holding rare wine from the 60s. It was a collection nobody in the family knew about, and it could fetch tens of millions at auction. Your grandpa wanted this to go to you, Thomas said. But there's a problem. Your dad recently found out about the warehouse and is trying to claim it. I couldn't believe it. Richard, after all his screw-ups, was still at it. Thomas explained that Dad had hired a lawyer to fight for the warehouse, claiming it belonged to the winery, which meant Sophia. I clenched my teeth. This was their last-ditch effort to take back control, and I wasn't about to let them win. I moved fast. With Thomas and Matthew, I headed to California to check out the warehouse. When we got there, I was blown away. It wasn't just a warehouse, it was an underground bunker hidden under an old farm. Inside were hundreds of crates of wine, each labeled in Grandpa's handwriting. But as we were checking out the collection, I caught a shadow by the entrance. Someone was watching us. I signaled Thomas, and we slipped outside quietly. There was a guy in dark sunglasses who jumped into a car and sped off. I jotted down the license plate and sent it to my PI. A few hours later, he confirmed the car belonged to a lawyer Dad had hired. That meant Richard knew where we were and was probably cooking up a new plan. I decided to get ahead of it. With Thomas and Jake, who was ready to help with another stream, we came up with a strategy. I reached out to an auction house in New York that specialized in rare wines and offered them the collection. They were thrilled and agreed to set up an auction in a month, but only if I could prove the wine was mine. Matthew got all the documents together, showing the warehouse was in my name through Grandpa's trust. But I knew Dad wouldn't back off. I had Jake drop a teaser on social media. The biggest secret of the Wilson Winery is coming. Stay tuned for the auction. It was my way of messing with Richard and Sophia, getting them nervous, and it worked. That same night, I got a pissed-off text from Sophia. "You can't sell what belongs to the family. I'll do whatever it takes to stop you." I smirked. She'd just given me an opening to catch her slipping. A few days later, Matthew called with bad news. "Lucas, we've got a problem," he said. Dad had filed a lawsuit claiming the warehouse was bought with winery money, so it belonged to the business. But he'd messed up. Grandpa had been smart enough to keep the warehouse separate, registering it as a personal asset. Matthew was sure we'd win, but I wasn't taking chances. I decided to stage a public takedown at the auction. I pitched the idea to the auction organizers. Turn the event into a show where I'd tell the story of Grandpa, the winery, and my family's betrayal. They loved it, seeing it as a way to draw a bigger crowd. Jake hyped it up on social media, and tickets sold out in hours. I knew Dad and Sophia would show up to try and ruin my plans, and I was ready. Auction day in New York was intense. The room was packed. Collectors, journalists, bloggers, and curious folks. I stepped on stage, holding a bottle from Grandpa's collection. "This bottle isn't just wine," I started. "It's my grandpa's story, his dreams, and his belief in me." I laid it all out. How my family cut me out of the will, tried to steal the winery, the land, and now this warehouse. I showed the documents, Grandpa's letters, and even Sophia's texts, where she bragged about her schemes. The crowd gasped when I played a video Jake shot at the warehouse, showing Dad's lawyer tailing us. Then I dropped the bomb. My dad and sister are here in this room, trying to take what's not theirs. Cameras swung to Richard and Sophia in the back rows. Sophia jumped up, yelling, "That's a lie!" But her voice got drowned out by the crowd. Dad just sat there, head down. The auction was a triumph. The collection sold for $32 million. And I announced half would go to the Wilson Legacy Foundation. The room erupted in applause, and I felt the weight of the past finally lift. But the story took one more turn. After the auction, a guy came up to me, saying he was a collector from France. He'd known Grandpa and said he'd once mentioned another secret, a vineyard in France he'd bought on the down low. I was floored. Another asset? I called Matthew, and we started digging. Sure enough, the vineyard was real, and it was in my name. It was the final piece of Grandpa's puzzle. I realized he didn't just want me to inherit his business. He wanted me to build an empire that'd outlast us all. Now I split my time between Oregon, California, and France, running the resort, the winery, and the new vineyard. The Wilson Legacy Foundation is growing, helping hundreds of young people worldwide. My book about betrayal and triumph is a bestseller, and the documentary with Jake won an award at a film festival. As for my family, Richard's out of the public eye. Sophia's trying to be a blogger, but her rep's toast. Elizabeth never came back from Mexico. And me? I found a new family. Thomas, Clara, and people who believe in me. Grandpa was right. I proved I was worthy of his legacy. So, you ever deal with family drama like this? Share your story below.